Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 17 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Philadelphia Flyers and lost by a score of 4-3 in the shootout. Hot off the heels of a nice 1-0 victory against the New Jersey Devils yesterday, a pretty good team, the Sharks come into tonight's game hoping to carry that momentum forward against a Philadelphia Flyers team that is much more their speed, finding themselves right near the bottom of the standings like the Sharks currently do. And yet, the Sharks, they came out with a pretty weak effort here tonight. In this first period especially, this was really categorized by, frankly, lazy and soft plays from the San Jose Sharks. In just the first 10 minutes of this first period, the Sharks gave up 5 2-on-1 chances against. Most teams don't even give up a 2-on-1 chance in most games, maybe once or twice, but to give up 5 in just 10 minutes is frankly unacceptable. And it was not just the Sharks defensemen making these mistakes, but it was also the incredibly weak effort on the back check from many of the Sharks forwards as well. Now, luckily for San Jose, they'd only end up giving up the 1 goal against in that situation, as Erik Johnson would score on the first of those 2-on-1s, but eventually Konechny would add a power play goal near the end of the first to make it a 2-0 first period. In the third, it was a much more sort of traditional lost period for the Sharks. Instead of giving up tons of odd man rushes, they simply just kind of got outplayed through much of this middle frame, constantly having to play in their own zone, and Matvei Michkov would add a goal to make it 3-0 Philadelphia. But there was a ray of sunshine, not just in the second period, but throughout most of this game, coming from the Lund line, who helps the Sharks get back in this one with a goal from Jack Thompson, assisted by Eklund and Granlund, as well as a goal from Granlund himself, to bring this one to within just a single goal in a game that really the Sharks didn't really deserve to be all that close in. In the third, maybe Sharks fans were hopeful that they might end up looking a little bit like the Devils did when they were trailing 1 goal last game and they really dominated and had all that offensive zone time. Not really the case here for the Sharks. While they had occasionally a couple of chances, the Flyers also pushed rather hard in this final 20 minutes, but it would actually be the Sharks who not only keep the Flyers off the board, but even get their game-tying goal from Barclay Goodrow to bring this to 3-3. But then, as we saw just last week against the Vancouver Canucks, the San Jose Sharks, after scoring this game-tying goal, feel as though their job is done for the rest of the night. And so the last couple of minutes of this third period are entirely Flyers controlled as they were looking and searching for that go-ahead goal once more. And the Sharks were doing everything possible to give it to them. But Vanacek, he steps up, he says no, and the Sharks end up going into the overtime with a prime opportunity to win it, as Matvei Michkov punches Macklin Celebrini right in the face, teen-on-teen violence here in the NHL. And so the Sharks have a full 2-minute power play going into the 3-on-3, now 4-on-3 overtime. And while they would get some chances, none of the particularly high dangerous variety, and we'd end up transitioning back to the 4-on-4, where the Flyers would wrest control back in this game, have some great chances in that 4-on-4 situation, but they also wouldn't manage to score. We'd eventually head to the shootout, and while the Sharks would send over Celebrini and Smith to try and get those goals, neither would manage to do so, and the Sharks come out on the losing end of this one, and like I said, rather deservingly so. The fact that they managed to get a point here tonight is honestly pretty solid. They should be thanking their lucky stars that they even managed to pull that one off. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have a Sharks top line that once again features Celebrini and Toffoli with Ty Dellandrea. Now, in the first period, I thought this line was all right. Ty Dellandrea was doing an okay job of doing what he does best, which is crash the net and hope that he can get those garbage goals, and Celebrini and Toffoli were managing to carry the weight on this top line. But then going into the second and third period, it kind of slowed down, and we saw once again why Ty Dellandrea is not really a top line player here. He's just not a very good complement to the rest of this line. And look, I have no doubt that Celebrini is a talented enough player that he could eventually still find some success playing with Ty Dellandrea on this top line, but it reminds me kind of the early parts of Connor McDavid's career with the Edmonton Oilers. McDavid, through those first couple of seasons, was occasionally placed with like fourth liners and third liners, and he would manage to elevate those players up to 20-goal scorers and still manage to find a ton of success, but it was clearly not him playing at his absolute best. And now over these last couple of seasons with the Oilers, where he's placed with Zach Zach Hyman and Leon Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and whoever, now suddenly he's a 150-point player who's able to put up 100 assists in a particular season. That's what I'm seeing for Celebrini. Not that he's the best player in the world like McDavid is, but that sure, he could be okay with Dellandrea, but if you actually give him some really, really good talent, it will just be even better than that. And so it feels as though it is a missed opportunity these last couple of games to have him stapled to a player like Dellandrea, which, no offense to him, is just not a first liner. So the question then becomes, what is the solution to this problem for the San Jose Sharks? Because if it's not Dellandrea, who actually is it? Well, the Sharks definitely wouldn't want to separate the Lund line at this point. As I mentioned, they were the ray of hope throughout much of this game. They could technically go with Will Smith, who they were willing to have play at wing here tonight for the first time this season, though I don't know if Warsofsky will want to go in that direction, especially with how Smith ended up playing here tonight, which is something I'll get to a little bit later. In this game, what I am worried about seeing is that near the end of it, it seemed as though the Sharks were angling to perhaps have Goodrow play on this top line. And if Dellandrea was bad, Goodrow was going to end up being even worse. I do recognize he managed to score here tonight, and so you might be thinking, well, this is the perfect player to have on this top line. Definitely not the case here. It feels as though the Sharks might actually have to go searching into their the Barracuda pool of players if they really wanted to find someone who could at least be a decent enough complement to Celebrini. Obviously, Gushin is the most obvious answer to that question. Bring him up. He's already played multiple games this season and showed himself to be at least pretty good, but they could also go with someone like a Bordeleau or someone like a Colin Graf as well. But right now, at this moment, unless they want to have Smith up in this role, which I don't know is the case, and since they definitely wouldn't want to break up the Lund line, it feels as though a Barracuda player is probably the best option, because it's definitely not Dellandrea, it's definitely not Goodrow or Cunnin or Giovanni Smith or Grunstrom or whoever the case might be. When it comes to the other two players on this line, I'll go next with Tyler Toffoli, who I thought also had a strong first period, which is likely the reason why this first line in the first period actually still looked rather good, because then once the second and third period rolled around, Tyler Toffoli was a lot less effective. I don't necessarily think it was a terrible game for Toffoli. He just didn't really get to do much outside of that first 20 minutes, where he honestly did manage to impress with a lot of his stick play. You want to see that over a full 60 minutes, however. You wouldn't expect to have to talk about consistency for a player as much of a veteran like Toffoli is, but looking for some consistency for sure that the Sharks really haven't gotten from Toffoli for much of this season. And then when it comes to Celebrini, obviously still a very fun game, continues to just be someone who loves to play with the puck and is able to do so quite marvelously. However, if there is another thing to be saying about Celebrini, there are still some moments of these giveaway types of plays. He is definitely one of, if not the current best San Jose Shark when it comes to creating these controlled zone entries. His ability to actually carry the puck over the blue line by using his speed and skill to back off opposing teams' defenders is really unrivaled on the Sharks currently. However, that is not always the correct solution. Sometimes the best move is simply to just dump the puck in, and Celebrini is going to have to get a bit more used to actually doing that himself. Sometimes just send the puck, force the other team's defenders to turn around, use your speed then to attack and get the puck back on the forecheck. You're not always going to be able to just carry that one in yourself. There was actually a moment, I don't remember if it was in the second or the third period, where Celebrini attempts to enter the zone multiple times and he ends up just skating parallel with the blue line, is denied entry twice or even 3 times before passing the puck back to his own defense, who then dumped the puck in themselves. So that was an easy dump and move for Celebrini, but he was really looking for that opening that just didn't actually exist for him. So I like his willingness to try and carry it through, but that's not always the correct play. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, the Lund line, it's Eklund, it's Granlund, it's Zetterlund, and it's once again fantastic. It was already beginning to be really good in the previous game against New Jersey, not on a consistent basis, but when the Sharks seemed to have a good shift, it was usually that second line who was really doing it, and the case was definitely here once again tonight. Really, it was by far the Sharks' best line. It's not even remotely close. These 3 players were working in harmony. This was really the first line win in this entire season thus far that actually looks good on a consistent basis, which is quite nice to see. Eklund was on fire, making some slick passes. Zetterlund is looking a lot better as well. He played quite good yesterday. He was even better here tonight, I would say. And then Granlund really pulling the two of them together as well. It was a fantastic line here tonight. There's not even that much else to say about like negatives here or there. Sure, maybe there were a couple of moments, but the positives outweigh the negatives by far. Far and away, like I said, the Sharks' best line, not even close. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we have Wenberg with Barclay Goodrow, and Will Smith takes up the mantle on this third line as a winger, which obviously comes as a bit of a surprise. Many people were predicting Will Smith to start his NHL career in the wing position, considering the Sharks had Celebrini, they had Granlund, they had Wenberg. There really wasn't much room for Will Smith to play at center unless they wanted to have someone like Granlund or Wenberg on the wing, which they have gone with recently to keep Smith in that center position, but now they finally decided to move away with that. I recognize Mike Greer's want to have that 1-2 punch moving over through the first 10 to 15 years in the NHL, but Smith, I think he's been okay and he's been getting better in the center position, but it's not necessarily the progress is like passing with flying colors. And so having him with more or less responsibility here by playing in a wing position might actually work out. And so for Smith, it was an incredibly up and down game. It kind of reminds me of the Anaheim Ducks game he played a couple of weeks ago, because there was a lot of good here tonight with Will Smith. He set up some great chances, probably 3 or 4 really high danger opportunities set up entirely off of the strong vision and passing from Will Smith. But the good came very much with the bad here as well. On the first goal scored by the Philadelphia Flyers, it is Will Smith who is very weak effort on the back check. It seemed as though halfway through he felt as though possession was going to go back in the way of the San Jose Sharks, and so he lost a step and ended up behind. It wasn't entirely his fault. I also thought Wenberg had a pretty weak back check on this play as well, but still. And then of course on the Matvei Mishkov goal on top of that, it is Will Smith who is covered by a couple of players, but instead of just sort of tying this one up here so that it doesn't create that breakout opportunity for Mishkov or just playing the puck back down the boards and winning it, he tries for the aggressive and risky play, the center to the middle of the ice. It gets picked off and the Flyers end up with that breakaway goal. So there is definitely a lot of bad here for Will Smith as well. Very, very up and down, as I said, which is why I mentioned earlier on that I'm not sure Warsofsky is going to want to have Smith in a top line position. It's one thing if you're on the third line and you're getting some slightly easier matchups, but if you're going to give even the slightest of openings playing against other teams' top lines in the NHL, they're going to burn you more often than not. And right now, Smith is just not a reliable enough player to be in that top 6, it feels like. So I don't know if Warsofsky would be quite willing to pull the trigger unless he really, really has to. When it comes to the other two players on this line, I guess we can go with Barclay Goodrow, who had a very interesting performance here tonight. He actually had a very Cunnin-esque game, at least right up until he got that game-time goal, because he had a few chances here tonight. I'll give Barclay Goodrow credit for that. He had a few really good looks, but it felt as though each time he was just failing to bury on them until right at the end, this puck deflects right to him. A bit of a lucky bounce, but he was able to get the puck past Urson, so nice to see him get rewarded in that case. However, as I said, it does seem Warsofsky was somewhat angling to have Goodrow play in a more expanded offensive role. He was getting multiple of these shifts in the last few minutes, which is you only give to someone who you are liking the game of, and I am very wary of that happening. Yes, he scores the goal, but that is not really a sign of great things to come for Barclay Goodrow. It's not really the beginning of a beautiful hot streak for him where he's putting up goal and point all around the world there. It was just kind of a one-time goal thing, it feels as though, for Goodrow, and so I don't think it necessarily means great things. So I'll give him credit for the game, but for much of this season, he really hasn't done much for San Jose, so it's hard to necessarily justify a move up. When it comes to Alex Wenberg, I thought Wenberg was classic Wenberg. It feels as though we pretty much say this every single game. There's not major mistakes being made here outside of the weak back check, I guess, on that first goal for sure. There's not necessarily tons of fantastic plays either, but I thought he had some decent chemistry with Will Smith. That's something we have seen in the past this season occasionally when they are on the ice together. So maybe that is somewhat of a long-term move for the San Jose Sharks. We shall see. And then we get to the Sharks' fourth line, where we had a pretty surprising inclusion. Giovanni Smith gets a second straight game here. I was impressed with Giovanni Smith's game yesterday against the New Jersey Devils, but I thought he'd still be the odd man out when Smith would come back in, because I didn't think that Grundstrom and Sturm were all that bad, and so that they would likely hold on to their spot. But Warsofsky goes the opposite direction. He does end up healthy scratching Grundstrom and have Giovanni Smith get into the lineup here tonight, and it backfires completely, as this fourth line was not good, even remotely so, for the San Jose Sharks. Giovanni Smith, who drew the penalty yesterday and had a good shift as well, doesn't do absolutely anything. He gets about 6 minutes of ice time. It leads to pretty much 0 shots on net for this fourth line at all. They were pretty much always playing in the defensive zone. He also ends up getting into a fight with Erik Johnson right after Johnson scored that goal, and then it was honestly the worst fight I have ever seen in my time watching the NHL. Not just because of Smith. I thought Johnson also barely participated in this fight, but it was really sad, honestly, to watch that one actually play out. But yes, this fourth line, it was not good. Really no redeeming qualities of it, outside of maybe Luke Cunnin being okay on the penalty kill yet again. It is likely that Smith ends up being the odd man out going into next game if Grundstrom is to step back in. When it comes to the defensive side of things, we have the top pairing of Ceci and Thrun. Sort of a give and take here. I thought Thrun, coming off of a really nice game in the previous one against the New Jersey Devils, actually did kind of keep that up going into tonight's. I thought he was probably one of the Sharks' better defensemen. It's not saying a ton, because I think the Sharks' defensemen really struggled here tonight through many portions of this game, but Thrun was probably one of the defensemen who struggled the least in this one, so there is some good things to be said about that. When it comes to his defensive partner Ceci, I thought he was also really lights out when it came to yesterday's game against the New Jersey Devils, and a much less so here tonight. He was not the worst of the worst defensemen for San Jose, but he was also not particularly close to the best. Definitely not his best night here. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive pairing, we have Timothy Liljegren, and I was very happy with Liljegren's performance yesterday. I thought it was his best as a San Jose Shark, but tonight I thought it was his worst. There were some really, really terrible passes from Liljegren. He's still not really on the same page when it comes to actually playing with this team offensively, but at least previously his defensive game had been rather solid. But here tonight he was dropping coverage, making terrible passes. It was just an ugly performance, I felt as though, from Liljegren. Not a lot of redeeming qualities there. I definitely thought he was perhaps one of the worst, if not the worst, defenseman for the Sharks here tonight. In fact, he was so bad that he honestly sort of made Ferraro look okay in comparison. Now, this is not me saying, put down the pitchforks. This is not me saying that Ferraro actually played a good game. He had his own whole host of mistakes, but kind of like yesterday, when you compared Ferraro to Liljegren, Ferraro looked significantly worse. When you compare him to Liljegren tonight, who was really bad, I thought Ferraro looked decent enough. Still pretty not good, still one of the worst defensemen for the Sharks here tonight, but not as bad as his D partner. And then when it comes to the final pairing, we have Jan Ruda and Thompson. For the second straight game, I found myself saying, hey, Jan Ruda is not that good. And then for the second straight, or it was not that bad, I should say. And then for the second straight game, I'm left punished immediately, as then Jan Ruda ends up making a terrible mistake and giving the puck away. I really need to stop thinking that, because every single time I try to even give the slightest bit of credit to Jan Ruda, he immediately punishes me by making an awful move. But still, in this very smaller role, he's not as much of a liability. There were the giveaways. He did take a bad penalty as well, so it was not perfect. It was not even good, I would say, but it was slightly better than awful. Progress, I guess. And then when it comes to his defensive partner, Jack Thompson, it's been very up and down, obviously, when it comes to Thompson. A couple of games ago, I thought he was quite good. Yesterday against the New Jersey Devils, I wasn't super happy with him. Here tonight, definitely redeemed himself. I thought he had a pretty solid outing. There were still the occasional defensive mistakes, but from an offensive perspective, I thought he looked quite good, jumping into the rush and picking up his second career goal. Actually managed to activate a couple of other times to even be a dangerous option there up at the blue line. So I liked Thompson's game here tonight. It will still continue to be interesting to ask ourselves what exactly happens with Jake Wallman once he does return to the lineup, as he was absent from this game yet again. Who is going to be the odd man out if that does end up being the case? all signs, I would say, should point to Jan Ruda, but you never know. And then finally, we have the Sharks goaltender Vitek Vanacek steps back in. Not a surprise, obviously, even though Blackwood was so good yesterday. It was still the second half of a back-to-back. You don't usually go back-to-back with the same goaltender these days in the NHL, so Vanacek gets back into this one, and it's really hard to blame him for many of these. The Eric Johnson goal was on a 2-on-1, one of many 2-on-1s that the Sharks would give up, and so eventually you're sort of going to have that break through and get the goal. The Konechny one was on a beautiful tic-tac-toe play on the power play for the Flyers. Again, very difficult save to be made. And then the Michkov one, while it is a 5-hole goal that you could say, well, maybe Vanacek, it's on a breakaway. Are you really going to blame him all that much? It feels as though the defense and the forwards, obviously, did kind of let Vanacek down throughout this one. Maybe you could say he could have given a better effort in the shootout, I guess. But realistically, that's always a kind of a coin flip. I thought it was an okay enough game for Vanacek. He certainly tried his best. Honestly, he was probably one of the Sharks' best players on the night. It's not saying much, but still. And so that'll do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday as the road trip does continue. And we shall see if the Sharks can get back into the win column there. Class dismissed.